3 Lives, 3 Worlds. Lotus Steps Book 3 Chapter 22. One Step for 1,000 Kalpas Finale. By Tangqi. Yanlan stayed up all night. Early this morning, Ranner was sent to UNG Palace to inquire about the news. The UNG Palace was reduced to an iron wall by Tianbu. What could Yuan'er get back by inquiring about it? She wandered back to the Qingfen Palace, hesitating until the end of the day, not daring to enter the palace. As a result, Immortal Chonglin from Taichen Palace arrived. Immortal Chonglin recognized her and asked her, "Can your flower master be in the palace?" This meant asking her to lead the way. Yuan'er did not dare to neglect and immediately stepped forward to respectfully lead Immortal Chonglin into the palace. Yuan'er has also been working as a messenger in the sky for tens of thousands of years. She is a clever little fairy who is always well informed. Immortal Chonglin, who hardly leaves for 13 days when there is no important matter, unexpectedly came to their Qingfen Palace, holding something that looked like an edict. My heart felt a little heavy and I felt something was not good. Yuan'er's premonition was right, Chonglin Xian. I came to their palace today because I really have something to do, and that is to issue the edict with the Emperor's seal in my hand. Such things as edicts have always been used to demote immortals. The decree in Chonglin's hand was also used for this purpose. This edict is concise, with no polite words. It goes straight to the main point from the beginning. It accuses Yanlan of being in a high position as the flower master, but has not thought about making progress for many years. Although he has not made any major mistakes in the 1,000 Flowers ceremony that he has recently planned, he has not made any minor mistakes. But it continues after 30,000 years of experience. Disappointingly qualified for the role of flower owner. The second blame is that she did such a good job in her duties. Instead of reflecting on it in the palace, she became more and more undisciplined, disrespectful of her superiors, unfriendly to her colleagues, and did many extraordinary things. She was derelict in her duties and unethical, which is heartbreaking. Therefore, the emperor issued an edict to deprive him of his position as flower master and demote him to Danhu Mountain in the northern wasteland as a river guardian of the river. He was expected to meditate on his mistakes in his new position and be diligent in the morning and night. The River Keeper Immortal is a local immortal and a small immortal at that. This immortal position is even inferior to the position of immortal attendants from the 9 heavens who serve the little fairies in various palaces. After hearing Chonglin read this edict, Ranner's heart became cold. Seeing Zhonglin's kind face, she suppressed her fear and asked Chonglin tremblingly, Xianjun, please forgive me, but I have something unclear. I ask the Immortal Lord to clarify my doubts. Since the Flower Master has been demoted, then, what should we, the immortal servants of Qingfen Palace, do? Chonglin rolled up the oracle and answered her question in a friendly manner. It's a matter for the Immortal Attendant Department, and Immortal Lord Qiliang of the Immortal Attendant Department will soon send someone to accommodate you. After saying this, Chonglin was about to hand the rolled-up oracle to Yanlan. Unexpectedly, Yanlan, who had been kneeling with his head down and unable to see her expression clearly, actually knocked down the oracle and stood up suddenly, gusting the wind. As if flying out of the hall, Zhonglin frowned, glanced at Yanlan's back as he rushed towards the palace gate, and told Ranner, "Follow and have a look, don't let her make a fuss." What a mess! Yanner took the order and quickly followed. Ranner finally found Yanlan at the gate of UNG Palace. Yanlan knelt at the foot of the tall white marble steps. His Highness the Third Prince stood on the steps, and Tianbu held an umbrella for him. The 4 silver-armored guards no longer guarded the palace gate, but guarded 100 feet away from the palace gate to prevent the fairies who wanted to watch the fun from approaching close. But they put her in. Yesterday, while following Yanlan's plan to plot against the 2 charming guests in UNG Palace, Ranner felt uneasy and ominous from time to time. Although all of Yanlan's arrangements were sound, she always felt that it might be okay to use this plan to deceive other immortal monarchs, but if she wanted to deceive His Highness the Third Prince, who was once in charge of the criminal division, was there something missing? Therefore, all day yesterday, her heart had been stuck between concentration and uncertainty. Today, the sharp sword hanging above my head finally ends. You fell to the ground. As expected, His Highness was suspicious of her flower owner. Otherwise, why did the Emperor's edict of relegation come down today? Otherwise, her flower owner got the decree and came to see His Highness. Why would His Highness rather let the fairies gather outside to watch the excitement of UNG Palace than allow her flower owner to enter the palace? Your Highness, UNG Palace has always been kind to fairies. In the past 30,000 years, her flower master has gotten into so many troubles. They all tolerated her lightly. This time, it came to this. Ranner couldn't help but feel frightened, and there was fear in her movements. She approached cautiously and saw Yanlan's beautiful and pale face. She was looking at His Highness the Third Prince, complaining aggrievedly. I know that the decree was His Highness's intention. All the words blaming me in it are just excuses. Your Highness wants to punish me, but in fact, His Highness wants to punish me. It's because the two fairies suffered a crime yesterday when they entered the tower. But I don't understand why Your Highness wants to put all this on me and blame me. When Fairy Rongrong wanted to break into the tower, I also tried to dissuade her, but I couldn't help but let her break into the tower. I immediately sent someone to UNG Palace to inform her. Your Highness, please think about it. If I hadn't sent someone to report the news yesterday, would you have been able to rush to rescue the two fairies in such a timely manner? I don't dare to be greedy for merit, but His Highness not only doesn't care about my kindness, but instead turns his anger on me. Your Highness treats me so unfairly. The rain was not heavy, like soft silk threads blowing away in the wind, so Yanlan didn't look embarrassed as she knelt in the rain. Only her hair was wet by the drizzle and stuck to her cheek, slightly showing. It was messy, but it didn't detract from her beauty, but made her look fragile and pitiful. Yuan'er has served Yanlan for 30,000 years, and has watched her step by step from a fairy who is a little aloof and selfish, but is not deep in the city and does not disdain to be vicious and scheming, to what she is today. She boasts that she knows Yanlan well, and knows that she is just showing off at this moment. But Yanlan's acting was so realistic that Ranner felt that if she had not personally participated in the scheme to plot Rongrong, she might have been deceived by Yanlan. Maybe her flower owner can really still come back? Thinking of this, Ranner immediately stepped forward, knelt down beside Yanlan silently, held up an umbrella for her, and began to play the role of a loyal servant who would never leave her. After Yanlan's words came to light, there was silence for a moment in front of the palace gate. In the silence, it was Tianbu who spoke first. Yesterday, two fairies broke into the Demon Lock Tower. Did the fairies really have no bad intentions and play tricks in this matter? But this is inconsistent with the fairies' usual behavior. Yanlan, hearing this, his eyes suddenly turned red. He seemed to be extremely unjust and extremely humiliated. Do you think that just because I have thought wrong and done some stupid things in the past, I am not allowed to change now? I really just want to do this well now. Flower Master, he didn't think about anything else. Didn't His Highness once say that as long as I change my mind and stop thinking about His Highness, he would be willing to support me in the 9 heavens? Tianbu was stifled. She was surprised that Yanlan had become so sharp-tongued now. It is true that His Highness suspected that Zongrong broke into the tower. Lan couldn't escape her involvement, so he killed her so neatly. But it is true that there is no evidence for this suspicion, and His Highness seems to have decided to punish her without even thinking about finding evidence. At that time, Tianbu didn't feel anything was wrong, but now, facing Yanlan's tears, Tianbu felt wronged and didn't know what to say. Yanlan observed the words and expressions, and seeing Tianbu acting like this, he understood that her words just now had an effect. Morally, she has the upper hand. She knows this is the best way to go further. At the right moment, she raised her hand to wipe away her tears and planned to say something more, but a cold question came from above her head. By the way, what's going on with DG? It was Lian Song asking her. Yanlan paused while wiping away her tears. Half a month has passed since DG fell into the water. No one was held accountable that day, and even Song did not ask about it after he returned to heaven. She thought that the matter had been settled, and she never thought that the Third Highness would mention it at this time. This question was beyond her expectation, and she subconsciously defended herself. Your Highness, are you talking about DG accidentally falling into the water at the Thousand Flower ceremony? That's because the goddesses of Bianchun Mountain misunderstood that DG was a newcomer to UNG Palace, so they tricked her into going to the Jiaqing Lake Pavilion. Borrowing a sword to hurt someone is the same trick I played when I was a kid. Lian Song interrupted her words as if he was bored, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly in a subtle smile, as if he thought she was naive. Where did the goddesses in Bianchuan learn about DG's existence? For me, it may not be difficult to check. What do you think? Yanlan froze. After a long time, she trembled her lips and made a little sound. I just... She could no longer quibble. And at that moment, as if she was blessed to the soul, she suddenly understood that quibbles are useless. Is also meaningless. Lian Song has no evidence about the demon-locking tower and cannot convict her. He wants to use this matter to convict her. She didn't want to leave Jichangshan, and she didn't want to be a little river guardian in the lower world. Yanlan finally panicked, but because of panic and fear, she became a little unscrupulous. Even if I am teasing that DG, but for the sake of a lowly DG, Your Highness wants to dismiss me from my position. This makes no sense. The sarcastic smile appeared on Lian Song's lips again. As an immortal from the 9 heavens, he has no good intentions and does not care about the old and the poor. Instead, he bullies the weak. If he has little virtue and high status, he will cause trouble. In this case, I will remove you from your position as Flower Master and let you go to the lower world to practice virtue. Okay, isn't it that unreasonable? You have no kind intentions and a low moral character. Yanlan couldn't accept these comments and couldn't help but hissed, "You are not doing it for DG at all." Lian Song did not deny it, but admitted it readily. Of course you should know that I am not doing it for DG. Yanlan held her hand firmly and said, "But that matter is just your prejudice against me, and you have no evidence." Lian Song lowered his eyes and looked at her. "You should be glad that I didn't look for evidence." But he didn't explain more about the sentence. He only raised his hand and rubbed his forehead, as if dealing with her for so long made him feel irritated. The decree has made it very clear, the time left for you. Not much left. Go back and pack up before setting off for Danhu Mountain. Jichangshan will not leave you alone. After saying these words, before Yanlan could react, he turned around and walked towards the palace gate, without letting Tianbu hold up his umbrella. His Highness did not order Tianbu to find evidence that Yanlan was plotting against Zongrong. How many mistakes has Yanlan made in the past? It is only thanks to the protection of UNG Palace that he can survive the impeachments of the gods again and again. And the mistakes she had made in the past, all added up, were enough for her to be demoted 10 times and 100 times. If we want to dismiss her now, we really don't need to find new mistakes on her part. In fact, if Yanlan doesn't provoke God Zudi, he may not really anger His Highness. Thinking of this, Tianbu felt suddenly enlightened, and also felt that Yanlan is stupid. She has always been gentle, but she couldn't hold back at this moment and mocked Yanlan. Don't you understand what His Highness means? What His Highness means is that for Changyi's sake, he will not take the initiative to find someone. There is evidence that you murdered someone, because if there is evidence, you will not receive such a light punishment. He sighed, and you are able to kneel here and ask His Highness why he treats you like this, and you are also relying on Changyi. Your blessing depends on His Highness's compassion, do you understand? Yanlan's face, as if he hadn't heard her words, and just murmured to himself, "For those 2 people, he treated me like this. Is he serious this time? But if he can be serious to others, why can't you be serious about me?" As she murmured these words, her eyes seemed to be filled with blood, mixed with hatred and fierceness. She stood up quickly and ran up the steps chasing Lian Song's back, but she had been kneeling for a long time. Her steps were unsteady, and she fell down on the long steps in a panic after running a few steps. He climbed up to help her, but she threw him away. As she climbed up the steps, she shouted frantically at Lian Song's back, Lian Song, you owe me. You owe me, but you still want to drive me away. 30,000 years ago, did I ask you to save me and reincarnate me as a human? Did I want you to come to the mortal world to find me? Did I ask you to cut off my reincarnation and make me an immortal? After becoming an immortal and becoming the master of this flower, it's hard to walk on thin ice in this 9th level of heaven. It's so difficult to live in such a difficult time. These days, these hardships are all given to me by you. Now you want to abandon me completely and drive me away. You say that immortals should be benevolent and should show mercy to the elderly and the weak. But if you play with my destiny like this, where is your kindness and compassion for the weak? The questioning voice was full of resentment. Lian Song, who was about to enter the palace gate, stopped and turned around. What do you think? He was silent for a moment. I ignored Changyi's wishes and saved her and made her reborn in the mortal world. In this world, I became you. Maybe she is indeed unwilling, so there is no trace of her in you. He laughed lightly at himself. I shouldn't have saved you at that time. It was my fault. It was also my fault that you became an immortal. Therefore, during these 30,000 years, I have given you enough protection, and I have also recruited teachers for you, so that you can be a good god and be qualified for the position of Flower Master. Having reached this point, I consider myself to have done my best to you. At this point, he sneered lightly. Since you are unhappy, you are also dissatisfied. If you are satisfied and becoming an immortal is not what you want, then I can send you back to the mortal world and make you reincarnate again. You can think about it again and decide whether you want to go to the mortal world or Shanhu Mountain. Just reply to me before tomorrow. This time, you can choose for yourself. After saying that, he stopped looking at the smoke and walked away, and his figure quickly disappeared behind the palace gate. Yanlan was completely stunned. Is becoming an immortal really not what she wants? Does she really want to be immortal? No. Tianbu held an umbrella and walked up the steps step by step. When he came to Yanlan, he couldn't help shaking his head and sighing. 30,000 years ago, if His Highness hadn't saved the fairy would have died long ago. Your Highness saved you, helped you reincarnate as a human, and then helped you become a human being. You returned to heaven and gave you a fairy position that is respected by thousands of people. Do you still feel that His Highness owes you? Fairy, do you know how difficult it is for a demon or a mortal to cultivate immortality? She glanced at Yanlan's side. Who was holding an umbrella for her cautiously, said, Your maid Yor is the cuckoo demon who became an immortal. Do you know how many years it took for her to transform from a demon to an immortal? Do you also know that she has to go through a transformation from an ordinary immortal servant? How many years will it take you to reach the position of Flower Master, assuming you have excellent ability and luck? How many years? Do you know how many years it will take to go from an ordinary immortal servant to your position as the Flower Master, assuming you have excellent ability and luck? Tianbu's voice was gentle, but the words he spoke were like soft thorns, stinging Yanlan. She counterattacked calmly, but he saved me and helped me become an immortal, not for me, but for himself. He is doing it to satisfy his own selfish desires. Tianbu smiled helplessly. Fairy, do you know that there is a saying that one's deeds do not matter one's heart? For immortals or, on the way to cultivating immortality, it is a chance to receive a trace of unintentional spiritual due from gods and Buddhas. People who cultivate immortality will not forget the kindness of gods and Buddhas just because they are unintentional gifts. Of course, this is just the morality that we cultivators believe in. She paused and said, If the fairy really doesn't want to be a fairy and is worthy of her name, then it's okay to blame His Highness like this. But it seems to me that fairies don't want to be fairies, right? Yanlan trembled her lips. She wanted to argue, saying that she really didn't want to be an immortal, but if this is the case, Tianbu will definitely report it to the Third Highness, who will make her enter the mortal world. She thought this was Tianbu's scheming. How could this person be so bad? She gritted her teeth with hatred, but had nothing to say. Tianbu sighed softly. Fairy, you are actually very greedy. Have you never known it? But even if you are so greedy, His Highness is still willing to let you go to Fangxian Mountain and be a free man for the sake of Chang'e. Immortal, this is already an extraordinary gift. Think about it carefully. After that, Tianbu ignored her and walked towards the palace gate with an umbrella. Tianbu's words hit Yanlan's heart like a heavy hammer, and her face was blue and white. She never thought of herself as greedy. In the past 30,000 years, hasn't she been enduring humiliation and burden? Isn't she the one who was let down? Lian Song brought her to heaven. Shouldn't he be responsible for her? Isn't it right for him to give her everything, including his love? If you can't give it, wouldn't you be letting yourself down? Is there anything wrong with this? At noon, Yanlan returned to Qingfen Palace like a wooden sculpture and then sat motionless in Nongyi Palace. Ranner stayed with her and occasionally poured her a cup of tea, but she didn't drink it. As the night progressed, Ranner began to doze off. Ranner wiped the blood from her forehead carelessly. When you first ascended to heaven, the immortal attendant widely spread the news that you were an immortal who ascended through the back door. No one wanted to come to Qingfen Palace to serve, but I have heard about Fairy Changyi's achievements, so even though I was assigned to Qingfen Palace, I didn't say a word and just followed you wholeheartedly. You originally had good cards, held a high position as the flower master, and had the protection of the three highnesses. If you could stand on your own, you wouldn't have reached the stage. But he doesn't want to make progress. It has been 30,000 years, and 1,000 flower ceremony is still full of mistakes, which has been criticized by all the immortals. Ranner was startled and suddenly woke up. She heard Yanlan's question clearly, but did not reply immediately. Answer, there was silence for a moment. Yanlan stared at Yor with a heavy gaze and suddenly became angry. She grabbed the teacup at hand and threw it at Yor. Speak. The jade cup hit Yor's forehead and Yor's head buzzed. She was stunned. He raised his hand and touched it. His fingertips were stained red. It was blood. Yenner's eyes widened and suppressed resentment surged up. She finally couldn't help it and stood up quickly. Yes, Fairy Tianbu is right, you are greedy. Immortal criticism. Yenner gritted her teeth and said happily in one breath, this heavenly palace is indeed difficult to treat. If I turn my back on the Lord, I won't be able to continue here, so even if I don't like you, I can only follow you, figure out your thoughts and cater to you, call myself a slave day by day, follow you to do some stupid things, and finally make 3 people angry. Your Highness is disgusted. At this point, you're not only greedy, but also as stupid as a pig. Probably because she didn't expect that Yenner would dare to scold her, Yanlan was completely stunned at first. When she came back to her senses, she was shocked and angry. She turned over her hand and a long whip appeared in her hand. She held the whip and whipped it towards Yor. You cheap maid, how dare you insult me? However, Yenner nimbly dodged the whip and escaped as fast as he could. While escaping, he did not forget to taunt Yanlan. Humph, I only spent this last night with you because I felt sorry for you. Do you really think I'm still with you? Can you beat and scold me at will? From tomorrow on, you will be a river guardian fairy. Just try to start from a little fairy. Just keep going up and see how long it takes you to reach the 9th level again based on your ability. Yanlan didn't get any water today, and her physical strength was also running low. She couldn't catch up with Yuan'er before she reached the palace gate. And after hearing Yuan'er's words, she became even more embarrassed and angry. There was smoke in her 7 orifices, and there was a ball in her heart. Fire, with suffocating energy and blood, suddenly fell from the air, causing Ranner to laugh. She spat out a mouthful of blood. Did she fail this far after being here in the 9 heavens for 30,000 years? Thinking of it. At this point, I couldn't help but feel hatred and pain. As my heart surged, my vision went dark and Yanlan fainted. Yao Jun stayed in Yuanji Palace for 2 days. When he returned home, he was still a little confused. He felt that this trip to Yuanji Palace was very magical. Since he started training from his master, the old Yao Jun, this is the first time he has seen someone so confusedly. He has never diagnosed a pulse as bizarre as that of His Highness's friend, who looked like an immortal, but not an immortal, and seemed like a demon but not a devil. At that time, when he was diagnosing his pulse, His Highness the Third Prince was also there. Beside him, Seeing that he looked confused, he just asked him to prepare the medicine for his friend according to the general prescription for antidote to love poison. Although he was unsure, the Third Highness had already spoken so openly, so he prepared the medicine in a daze. According to Yao Jun's experience, once you have been poisoned by the 10,000 years lover's vine, you have to apply at least 7 or 8 doses of the medicine to completely detoxify it. But he didn't know what kind of constitution this patient had, but after just 2 doses of medicine, all the poison in his body was gone, making him mistakenly believe that his medical skills were the best in the world for a moment. Just in case, His Highness the Third Prince kept him for another half-day to make sure that his friend was indeed safe before releasing him back to Yajun Mansion. After Zhu Ti got rid of the love poison in her body, she did not feel any discomfort. The next day she went to Taichung Palace to guide the remaining power of the Western Emperor's blade in her body. After 3 days of guidance, when the last trace of the evil power of the Western Emperor's blade was drawn out by the Emperor and stored in the pot of goodness, she immediately felt much more relaxed with her immortal bones. For more than 3 months, she had been tortured by the power of the Western Emperor's blade, and she actually suffered some internal injuries. The Emperor provided her with 2 extra bottles of meatballs, allowing her to eat the meatballs and move her muscles and bones every day to recuperate. However, the Emperor also warned her earnestly, telling her not to be as active as breaking into the Demon Lock Tower, and that she could just ride a horse and shoot arrows. Then he talked to her about some business matters. The main idea was that Lian Song's operation was somewhat beyond his expectation. The cauldron was refined faster than he thought. It was being finished in the past 2 days. When the cauldron is out of the furnace and the container is ready, then it's better to split up and get the power of the gods such as wind, fire, and earth. In the final stage, when the cauldron is out of the furnace and the container is in place, they can separate to obtain the power of the gods such as wind, fire, and earth. When the Emperor mentioned Lian Song, he paused briefly and paid attention to Zhu Ti's expression, but Zhu Ti didn't seem to have any special expression, so the Emperor looked away. The Emperor knew about Zhu Ti's love affair, but the Emperor was not fond of gossip, and he was too lazy to think about what happened between her and Lian Song. He glanced at her more at this time, all because Lian Song came to look for him the day before yesterday tell him. He has recovered his memory and remembered everything from 30,000 years ago. The Emperor was surprised when he first heard the news, but he was only surprised for a moment before he calmed down, because modifying the memory of Lian Song was really an annoying and huge project. Later, he lost his patience. There were omissions in some places, which allowed Lian and Song to find gaps when looking back on the past, thereby completely overturning his revisions. This is also possible. But the Emperor did not admit that this was due to his negligence. He felt that this is fate, and since fate is so irresistible, then he still bothers to continue to interfere with them. Isn't this sick? That's what he thought. The conversation that Lian Song had with him that day happened very calmly. Lian Song didn't say much, only that he knew that Zhu Ti wanted to be a puppet to deceive him, and that the Emperor modified his memory for his own good. He was really irrational back then. However, 30,000 years have passed. Now that I think about it, everything in the past has become like a cloud, and there is nothing good about it anymore. Nostalgic. However, he remembered that the doll was still in Bihai Sangling back then, and she was still wearing his reverse scales. This time he came to see the Emperor and explained that all this was because he wanted to get back his reverse scales worn on the doll. In the Emperor's opinion, Lian Song finally figured it out. Anyway, the two of them wouldn't have much of a future together. It was great for Lian Song to think so, and he was quite pleased. If the Emperor understood love, he would not believe Lian Song's words so easily. It is unforgettable love. How can it be possible to figure it out as soon as you think about it, and let it go as soon as you want to let it go? But the Emperor doesn't understand love, and there are no people or things in this world that the Emperor who has reached the point of focusing on one interest cannot let go, so the Emperor has no doubts at all. At this time, the Emperor saw that Zhu Ti did not act strange when he mentioned Lian Song, and felt that it was best to leave the matter as it was. This is because he does not understand the heart of Lian Song, let alone the heart of Zhu Ti. At this moment, not to mention the emperor, even Zhu Ti herself was not sure of her own heart. The next day was the day when Lin went to the ninth heaven to report to his ancestor Ti. It's hard to say whether the news Lin brought back this time was good or bad. After launching the Qingjiang Izai Shumi formation, Lin and Zhao Shi collaborated with several civil and military servants of Liansong to investigate along this line, and found out that the small space that Xiangjia had sneaked into before was built. I just started trying to use the Demon General to refine the Batamahua companion body recently. After that, they discovered that Qingjiang had indeed been secretly studying the mustard seed Sumeru formation for the past 4 years. However, perhaps because he was afraid of alerting the enemy, he never sent anyone to the 9 heavens to steal the formation diagram of the mustard seed and Sumeru formation. He only stuck to studying the books left by the famous demon generals who had seen the mustard seed and Sumeru formation. Because Qingjiang kept this matter too secretive, even the demon envoys around him were not clear about it. Therefore, Xiangjia and the others had previously didn't find it. But in recent months, Qingjiang has not studied the mustard seed Sumeru formation very much. Start trying to refine the Batamahua companion body. Lin speculated that this was probably because Qingjiang had mastered the key to the mustard seed Sumeru formation. This also shows that their previous inferences and predictions about Qingjiang's ambition were indeed moving in the right direction without any detours. Zhu Ti was not too surprised when he heard the news. She nodded and said, "That's it." Looking at Lin's dusty body, he ordered. He said, "Take a rest for a while, go to Taichung Palace later, and report this news directly to the emperor." Lin nodded. After talking about business, Fong had time to ask her about personal matters. Lin first cared about her immortal body, and then thought about his words before asking, "I heard that Fairy Yanlan was demoted." Zhongrong felt that Yanlan's demotion might be related to her breaking into the Demon Lock Tower. It was related, but after thinking about it for a long time, she felt that the third prince might have indeed wronged Yanlan this time. "Your Majesty, I don't know what happened that day, so I would like to ask Your Majesty, what's the inside story about this matter?" Before talking to Lin, Zhu Ti was horse racing near the Tuanhe River. At this time, her snow-white Pegasus horse was walking in the Tianhe River to drink water. She and Lin were not far from the horse, standing in the nearby Sea of Clouds. Not far away, Lord Pleiades' golden chariot drove through the eastern sky. The boy in the car painted a 7-color morning glow wherever the golden chariot passed. This was a rather peaceful summer. Early morning. Hearing Lin's question, Zhu Ti turned her eyes back to the golden car not far away, thought for a while, and replied, "Then Fairy Yanlan was indeed demoted. I don't know the details, but Xiao's sailing there must be a reason for doing this." After saying this, she paused, showing a look of reminder, and asked Lin a question. "By the way, I forgot to ask you before. What about the rumor? Fairy Chang'e in the story should be the red lotus I left behind." Before Lin could answer, she continued, "I saw you in her memory and knew that you had taken care of her for a long time. However, why do the gods from Zhichangshan say that Fairy Yanlan is the reincarnation of Fairy Chang'e? But I didn't know that the soul I created could actually be reincarnated." After the snow-white Pegasus drank the water, he wandered over leisurely and came next to Ziti. She patted its neck, and the Pegasus rubbed her arm affectionately, and then wandered away slowly. It wasn't until the white horse left that Lin came back to his senses. This was indeed an oversight on his part. He immediately confessed his crime to Zhu Ti and explained in a few words his relationship with the red lotus seed. Regarding what happened after the red lotus seed transformed, he carefully said what he could say. In a roundabout way, the third prince helped Chang'e ascend to the position of Flower Master, but Chang'e fell in love with Sangji. In order to help Sangji rescue his sweetheart, he broke into the demon locking tower and ended up dead. The third prince and his elder brother Yi were close friends and couldn't bear to see her soul die, so they suppressed her aura and asked Lingbao Tianzuan to replenish it for her. Soul. I knew I couldn't reincarnate that so-called soul, because after all, she was not a real fairy soul, but just made of spiritual breath. Therefore, I went to the mortal world and locked up a mortal soul and came back, sneaked into the palace of Lingbao Tianzuan, and used that soul to reincarnate. The mortal soul replaced Chang'e's soul and put that soul back into your immortal body. Heavenly Court did not discover that the soul of Chang'e had been replaced, and they regarded the mortal soul as Chang'e made her reincarnate and become a mortal named Yanlan. This is the origin of Fairy Yanlan. She actually has nothing to do with Chang'e. It wasn't until the white horse left that Lin came back to his senses. This was indeed an oversight on his part. He immediately confessed his crime to Zhu Ti and explained in a few words his relationship with the red lotus seed. Regarding what happened after the red lotus seed transformed, he carefully said what he could say. In a roundabout way, the third prince helped Chang'e ascend to the position of Flower Master, but Chang'e fell in love with Shangji. In order to help Shangji rescue his sweetheart, he broke into the demon-locking tower and ended up dead. The third prince and his elder brother Yi were close friends and couldn't bear to see her soul die, so they suppressed her aura and asked Lingbao Tianzuan to replenish it for her soul. I knew I couldn't reincarnate that so-called soul, because after all, she was not a real fairy soul, but just made of spiritual breath. Therefore, I went to the mortal world and locked up a mortal soul and came back, sneaked into the palace of Lingbao Tianzuan, and used that soul to reincarnate. The mortal soul replaced Chang'e's soul and put that soul back into your immortal body. Heavenly Court did not discover that the soul of Chang'e had been replaced, and they regarded the mortal soul as Chang'e made her reincarnate and become a mortal named Yanlan. This is the origin of Fairy Yanlan. She actually has nothing to do with Chang'e. The origin of Fairy Lan actually has little to do with Chang'e. After clarifying this point, he again accused him. It is really my fault that I did not clarify this matter with my superiors in time. Sneaking into Lingbao Tianzuan's palace to exchange souls was not a very honorable thing to do, but that day I was really worried about what she would become if she was reincarnated, so I had no choice but to do this. Zhu Ti was silent for a long time. I didn't expect it to be like this, she said, sighing a little. Long in the years when Chang'e was the Flower Master, he contributed a lot to the new god's annals, which can be regarded as fulfilling Shaowan's thoughts. She was silent for a moment when she mentioned Shaowan. Finally, he looked at Yuan Tian with compassion on his face and said softly, "You are right. Chang'e cannot be reincarnated." Her intelligence and emotions, love, hate, and obsession disappeared when she died. At that time, as the spiritual breath drifted away, most of it was left in the demon-locking tower. The breath of her that Xiao Sanling held back at that time was purely part of the breath of me and Xiaowan, and part of Chang'e's memory. Use part of the breath and part of the memory to make a new soul. Even if the soul is reincarnated, the one who returns will no longer be Chang'e. She can no longer be an immortal. Even if she is brought up under the special conditions, they have made it easier for Fairy Yanlan before. In that case, she will no longer be qualified for the position of Flower Master. The Flower Master Shaowan and I left for this new era of gods is only Chang'e. If she goes, she is gone. Use part of the breath and part of the memory to make a new soul. Even if that soul is reincarnated, the one who comes back will no longer be Chang'e. She can no longer be a fairy. Even if she is brought up under special circumstances, as they did to Fairy Yanlan before, she will never be qualified to be the Flower Master again. The only flower owner Shaowan and I have left for this new era of gods is Chang'e. If she goes, she is gone. Zhu Ti said this sadly, and Lin felt quite sad when he heard it. He was keen and listened to Zhu Ti mentioning the demon-locking tower. Knowing what he meant, he immediately asked, "Your Majesty, are you saying that Chang'e's consciousness is still left in the demon-locking tower?" Zhu Ti nodded. Yes, they were placed on a spiritual stone, and perhaps that was the reason why they were not taken away by those soul-binding magic weapons. I accidentally entangled the spiritual stone with the original light, and those spiritual breaths returned to my body. Lin was shocked. Zhu Ti suddenly changed the topic and turned to look at him. The immortals in the 9 heavens seem to think that Chang'e likes the second prince Shangji. You just said so. Lin was already used to Zhu Ti. Occasionally, she would jump to random topics when talking. After hearing this, she immediately calmed down and replied, "Is there anything wrong with this?" Zhu Ti shook her head. She doesn't like Sangji. When that part of the spirit. After returning to breath, I saw her memories and her emotions. What she liked was Kozaburo. She fell in love with Kozaburo because she felt familiar with him when she first met him and wanted to get close to him. That feeling opened up her emotional intelligence and planted the seeds of her love for him in her heart. Lin was in a trance when he heard, "How could she like?" But before he finished speaking, his heart skipped a beat and he suddenly understood. This is indeed possible. More than 200,000 years ago, Lin sacrificed during those days. He always saw how Zhu Ti missed the water god. Tangqi was Zhu Ti's spiritual breath. Her soul was also created by Zhu Ti. Zhu Ti, who had always been thinking about the water god, unintentionally infected the soul with her longing for the water god when she was creating her soul. This makes perfect sense. Tangqi may have fallen in love with Liansong because of Zhu Ti's original concern for Liansong, who was ignorant of Qiqing. This sounds very mysterious, but at this time Lin felt so strongly. But of course, he couldn't answer Ziti like this. Zhu Ti glanced at Lin searchingly and fell silent in the middle of his words. Zhu Ti glanced at Lin inquiringly and saw that he fell silent in the middle of his words. He had no intention of speaking anymore, so she lowered her eyes and began to analyze herself. Perhaps there is a bit of ego in this. She hesitated slightly, but after thinking about it for a long time, I still feel that Tangqi's initial love for Xiao Sanling was probably because I had been looking forward to the birth of the water god. Didn't you tell me that more than 200,000 years ago I had a crush on the water god? Do you have many obsessions when you come to this world? So, the cause of all this, maybe, it all lies with me. And when the last trace of Tangqi's spiritual breath returns to my immortal body, I can feel her regret and pain. Said at this point, she looked at Lin. Do you know how those regrets and pains subsided? Regret and pain. Having said this, she looked at Lin. Do you know how those regrets and pains are calmed down? Lin shook his head. He had no idea that Zhu Ti could analyze to this level. He heard Zhu Ti continue calmly. They were healed by the bone-gnawing mantra planted by Xiao Sanling in my body. They subsided, and then the lingering consciousness of Tangqi also dissipated. It was like she finally felt safe and relieved of the world. I don't know what this outcome will be for her. Say it is good or bad. But she herself seemed satisfied. Lin was mute for a moment, and recalling the past where they had supported each other, he sighed a little, and said in a slightly astringent voice, it would be best if she could be relieved. Zhu Ti hummed. The two were quiet for a while. Zhu Ti asked him, by the way, when will Xiao Sanling be released from seclusion? She continued, since Tangqi has a close relationship with him, the causes and consequences of these things should be made known to him. Tangqi probably doesn't want him either. Has always regarded Fairy Yanlan as her reincarnation, and even became disappointed with her because of Yanlan. Lin smiled bitterly. That's the truth, but if the third prince blames me for replacing Tangqi's soul, how should I deal with it? The white horse wandered over again and rubbed against Zhu Ti. Zhu Ti stroked the horse's mane and said, there is nothing we can do that day. If he wants to blame, you and I will just accept it. After hesitating for a moment, he asked Lin again, how long will he stay in seclusion? Lin has just ascended to heaven. He is worthy of the name of Gugu's great steward. These trivial matters are much clearer than Zhu Ti, who has been in heaven. Your Majesty, after you were poisoned by the vine demon, the third prince, I guarded you all night, and then the thunder method was gone, and I continued to retreat to refine the cauldron. After all, the cauldron will be released after it is refined. Zhu Ti nodded after hearing this. Well, after I wake up, I have never seen him. After saying this, she was stunned for a while. Lin couldn't guess what she was thinking. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly got on her horse. The white horse swung its hooves, and she sat astride it, lowering her eyes and telling Lin, you go back first, and I will run alone for a while. The voice was calm, and no emotion could be heard. The morning light is overflowing with color, spreading over the entire sea of clouds. The white horse galloped towards the east sky, and the wind lifted Zhu Ti's golden dress. She is really suitable for movement and stillness, and her posture is elegant and pleasing to the eye. Lin looked at her back as if he had seen the love he had loved back then. The little princess, who was galloping on horseback in the spring day, had mixed feelings in her heart. Zhu Ti said that she had not seen Liansong in the past few days since she woke up. He also heard what Zongrong said. When she mentioned the fact that Zhu Ti was poisoned due to her involvement, Bo Rong felt very regretful, but when she mentioned Liansong, she was just angry. Your Majesty was poisoned. He was poisoned. But he is fine. Only with your Majesty I stayed by my side for half the night, but before daybreak and your Majesty hadn't woken up yet, he went back to retreat to practice the broken cauldron. His words were full of dissatisfaction. But Lin knew that this was not because Liansong was neglecting Zhu Ti and was indifferent to her, but he couldn't face her. As for why he couldn't face Zhu Ti, Lin also understood very well that it was because he and Zhao Shi teamed up to deceive him. Lin did not deliberately deceive Liansong. Because he had witnessed the unforgettable love between him and Zhu Ti in the mortal world, when Zhu Ti first woke up from a slumber of nearly 30,000 years, he also felt soft towards the two of them, thinking that if the fate could not be broken, even if they forget each other, if they still have feelings for each other, he will not stop them and let them just let it go. But that day, what Zhao Shi said made sense. 30,000 years ago, Zhu Ti stripped away all her memories of Liansong, of course, because she felt that she had no future with him and wanted to use them to create another Qinyu for him. But she did so because she loved him deeply, and since I know that if I remember him, I will definitely be bound by ordinary emotions and shake my heart of sacrifice. She cannot escape herself. Faced with the fate of her lover and sacrifice, she could only endure the pain and choose her fate. Zhao Shi asked her every question that day. Liansong remembered it, and then, let your Majesty also think of it, and then let your Majesty struggle again between choosing him or choosing your own mission. Do you think this is for your Majesty's sake? Okay, but I think it's best for her to let your Majesty never think of it. Those memories are what your Majesty wants to give up. This is the choice she made 30,000 years ago. We all saw how painful it was when she made this choice. Even though she woke up 3 years earlier, the final outcome will not change. Do we want her to suffer again? The dark clouds swept over and pressed heavily on Lin's heart. After a long time, he sighed heavily. That's it, he thought. The end of 3 lives, 3 worlds, Lotus steps.